I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. David Stuckenberg, a national security strategist, entrepreneur, inventor, and global influencer. In 2018 and 19, NATO named David a young disruptor. He's been called the George Kennan of this century by senior military leaders and a national treasure by the 16th Director of Central Intelligence, Ambassador R. James Woolsey. David's experience includes past roles as an Air Force Strategic Policy Fellow, military advisor to the Department of State, and director of the Electromagnetic Task Force on the Joint Staff. Dr. Stuckenberg has a Ph.D. in International Security Affairs and Policy from King's College London. He studied hybrid warfare and its impact on NATO and contemporary deterrence constructs. His research is cross-disciplinary and covers elements of war studies, social studies, strategy, international relations, history, technology, and science. David joins us today to discuss his 2024 grassroots campaign to become the next president of the United States. David, welcome back, sir. Let me start by thanking you for your tremendous career of service. So let's begin on that note.
Thanks, Tim. It's good to be back on the show with you.
Let me start with a simple question. Why you? Why now? What happened in that moment where you decided to take a stand and run for president?
Well, I grew up in a home where common sense typically prevails, rural Oklahoma town, and at the end of the day, it's never too late to do the right thing. Quite candidly, I'm a truth teller, not a politician. We're losing our country, and it's groomed candidates that the establishment is handing down that we can no longer afford to abide, and for many of the reasons that we're going to talk about today. But I think there are two enormous things happening right now in the United States. One of those is that we face an extraordinary external challenge to our sovereignty and to, frankly, our survival. We could talk more about that as we get into the cast. But we also face some internal things. And navigating both of these simultaneously is going to take a certain kind of person, a certain kind of character, and a certain expertise that until I enter the race is not in the mix. And that was enormously concerning to a lot of the people who know me and have said, hey, Dave, why don't you toss your hat in the ring? This could go either way, and our republic is far too important to play games with. But the final, I think, tipping, if you will, occurred on 9/11. I was in the yard with my son, Timothy, and we were doing some yard work, catching up. As you know, here in Tampa, I run a company, and I'm a hard worker. Like you, this is the land of the free, the home of the brave, where we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what is it that I'm pursuing? Well, I'm pursuing some global game-changing technologies in my company, and I get behind on my yard work. I make probably less than Joe the plumber, and I don't hire people to do everything for me. So we were catching up, and at the end of the day, I asked him on that day, I said, Tim, do you know, Tim is 18, do you know the story of John O'Neill? And he said, no, Dad, don't know the name. I said, well, John O'Neill was part of the FBI's terrorism task force, and he identified Osama bin Laden as one of the masterminds of the World Trade Center attack. Long story short, John O'Neill went to the FBI and said he failed to knock down these towers in 1993 during the first attacks. He's going to keep trying until he does it. Give me the resources to stop it. The FBI invited John O'Neill to retire. He did retire, but he didn't go into obscurity, which is what a lot of people with knowledge do. They disappear, they crawl under the rock, they go to ground. And what he did instead was go to work as head of World Trade Center security. He died on 9/11, and he died doing the right thing, defending the innocent, and using the knowledge he had to try to stop something terrible. And he was not successful, but I think he was a hero, and that heroism stands as an inspiration to me and others who know certain knowledge. And I've worked in national security for 21 and a half years. I know where our skeletons are buried as a nation. I know where our adversaries' skeletons are buried. And I know that things are coming to a point where we don't have the time or the luxury of lightweights anymore who come into the job not knowing what's at stake and not knowing where the contours and the dynamics are playing out. And so PBS Frontline would later do a documentary on John O'Neill's life, and that was called The Man Who Knew. I'm the man who knows in the modern era what we're up against with China. I would say that some would call me one of the nation's foremost experts on gray zone and hybrid warfare, below the threshold of war. Some call it, unrestricted warfare. But I'm the man who knows. And like John O'Neill, I think I had a choice to make. Either I can sit on the sideline and I can watch this thing unfold, or I can begin to be a truth teller with the American people. And I've been a truth teller my entire career with those who I've served with, the generals, the cabinet members at the State Department, at the White House, 29 NATO nations I've advised. But none of them listened and were blowing our window to do anything. So now I'm taking that case to the American people.
Well, David, I've known you for 4 or 5 years now. And again, your defense pedigree is impeccable. I mean, a PhD, strategist, experience on the Joint Staff. It is absolutely remarkable. And one of the consistent things that I have seen is that what has been happening in the United States troubles your soul on a very deep level. And that's something that not everyone has. A lot of people have intellectual troubles with things, but what I've seen with you is that it bothers you. You lose sleep about these things. And so it doesn't surprise me that you're running for president. It doesn't surprise me that you are trying to make that change.
Thanks, Tim, and it's true. Those who have served with me and on our nation's frontiers, I used an analogy the other day in a town hall in New Hampshire. I said, if you've ever seen the movie Dances with Wolves, here's Lieutenant Dunbar, played by Kevin Costner. Great movie if you like Western classics. He goes and travels far out into the prairie. He's to take his post. He arrives at this post called Sedgwick, Fort Sedgwick, which is nothing more than a cabin and a flagpole. And he arrives there and writes in his journal, "I have arrived at my post to find it abandoned and in disrepair, and I have appointed myself to clean up duty." And so, like many others who have come back from fighting after 9/11, I've flown in every theater of war since 9/11, and many of the ones not acknowledged, probably 150 combat missions, maybe more than that. But I've come home and I find my nation falling down. And, we have been in terrible straits before and come back from it. It requires the right leadership. And certainly we are in an era where many are claiming we need to give up on this idea of a constitutional republic. We need to try something new. That's dangerous. I would give my life for the Constitution because I know what it means. I know how special it is, what our forefathers helped put together for us, and it is our job to keep it. And the question for our generation, Tim, is, as I've walked the graves there at Arlington and other sacred places where the people who have served in the honorable cloth of our nation are buried, will we do right by them to preserve what we have? Or will we be like a locust who consumes everything we can in our lifetime and leaves nothing for the future generation? And when I look at my 5 children, when I look in the eyes of my son Timothy, I know that, Tim, it is up to you and I. The power of the Constitution is invested in you and I to elect the next president of the United States. And I believe this is an important election in 2024. That election is going to determine whether we preserve generations of Americans or whether generations are lost. I believe it's that important. And I know that my sons are ages 6, 12, and 18. One of them will face the consequences because of those generation gaps of the choices we make right now. And I cannot sit on the sideline as we careen towards disaster, as we, as Harriet Tubman said, march toward folly, when we know what the right things to do are, except that we lack the political will to do it. No more. So I'm raising a hand to say, folks, I've had your six as America's shield and defender for 21 years. Will you get mine and allow me to serve you so that I can put a turnaround team to put this country back on the right course? It's a question that we're going to answer, I think, in the next 60 to 100 days as we go through this election.
David, what are your primary platform issues for this campaign? What are the biggest things that we need to solve? And what are some of the less important things that we might be able to just shelve for a while we're dealing with the big issues?
Good question, Tim. Well, look, I think there are a lot of things that are important to a lot of people. But I was recently at a town hall in Arkansas, and I had I'm running as a conservative candidate, but I'm very moderate. I've worked for my whole career putting together high function teams that come from all walks of life, all political backgrounds, and guess what? We work to get the mission done. That's what I want to do in my cabinet. I want to put a turnaround team that is focused not on politics, but on outcomes, on performance. And the perpetual politicking, even once a president is elected. Right now, for example, we watch a White House press briefing. We all kind of do the eye roll, right? Like, okay, they're going to come and they're going to share a carefully crafted narrative that's been through, 15 wickets, and none of it feels like truth because it's so carefully crafted to create a perception. Why? Because someone's running a campaign, right? And I think we're all tired of that. We're ready for refreshing. We're ready for authentic. The other day I clipped a video for, I think, 45 seconds, and I said, hey, I just got a ticket in Iowa. Guess what? I'm the only presidential candidate without a driver. Why is that? Well, I was actually rushing to get to a town hall meeting because I have a message for you. And here's the message. You'd asked me, what the platform is. It's very simple. There are things that we can set aside that can wait till another time. Some of those things are deeply held and important to us, but they're not survival issues for the Republic. And I think we have three issues that we have to address immediately. And obviously for the listeners who have heard the early part of this podcast, there's some tells here. One, America is at war, and we are being overcome by one of the oldest surviving civilizations in existence, and that is China. This war is happening in 5 dimensions: diplomatic, informational, military, economic, and social. Okay? And some might even add to that the cognitive realm. But what does that mean exactly, Dave? Well, this is a kind of warfare that doesn't manifest necessarily with bombs and things blowing apart like what we see happening over in the Gaza Strip, okay? Or even in the Crimean Peninsula between Ukraine and Russia. This is a war that happens what we call below the threshold. It's below kinetic activity, but it's happening, it's competition unfolding in all of these other ways. And it's so effective that very few people have expertise with this, but the one command in the world that deals with this is called the United States Special Operations Command, and it's a type of special warfare. A gray zone war is against a nation state, oftentimes by another nation state, to achieve outcomes that don't involve actually bombing that nation or having their navies go head to head in dimensions like that. So this is full on right now, and it's been going for well over a decade. And just to kind of put this a little bit of meat on the bone, not too much, but while I was at the State Department, we had measured all the areas of competition between the United States and China. And at that time, I was in 2020, we were having a hard time, those of us who were military advisors, getting the diplomats to recognize the state of competition. And we said, hey, let's begin measuring that. So we put together a team and we began to pull all of the open source data. And when we put it on a wall, there's a wall behind me. So just imagine that covered with a checkerboard with hundreds of dimensions of competition, from the number of ships China's building to the number of Mandarin-speaking teachers they're sending out. Imagine those color-coded. The green ones are where China's winning that competition, and the U.S. is red, or you can swap that. At the end of the day, the overwhelming areas of competition were being won by China, probably 98%. If we look at just technology, for example, China's winning in 37 of 40 areas of advanced technology right now against the United States, whether that's quantum, artificial intelligence, hypersonics, fill in the blank. What are we doing? Well, we're conducting business as usual. If our political leadership, and to some extent our military leadership, was quite forthright with the American people right now, the American people would say, what are you doing to get this fixed? And then there would be accountability. So that accountability would drive America to a wartime footing. That's how severe things are. And not necessarily that we're starting to shoot or send troops abroad or any of those things, but it's that none of the preparation work right now is being done that will help America win. We're competing, but as my father, who was a racehorse trainer, used to say, you could put a three-legged horse in the Kentucky Derby. He can compete, but it doesn't mean that he's going to win. And right now, America is that three-legged horse, and we are competing against the oldest surviving civilization in the world that has said it's going to overcome us by 2049. And we're not on a course that ever intercepts to win. And that's deeply concerning. So first and foremost, from my platform standpoint, given that context, we have to put America into a strategy that will win. And the last time we saw a strategy like that was during the Cold War. The strategy was, unfolded. I think credit is given to George Kennan. It was called containment. It talked about how China seeks to essentially start a series of dominoes, and then as nations fall, communism would spread to those further nations. Russia, also as part of the communist belief system, was contained in that bloc. So the idea of containment was that the United States would push back against this ideological movement that sought to bring together the disenfranchised of the world into a new pool called the workers' class. And those folks would be then essentially promised that you'll have all things equal so long as you support the party will deliver for you. Well, that's always the promise that's far off, but it's never delivered. And in order to get that, of course, from an ideological standpoint, communism is a tyrant that is an equal opportunity destroyer. It doesn't care who you are, rich or wealthy or poor, uneducated, well-educated. It's an equal opportunity destroyer. So the United States does not currently have a strategy that will win in this competition. I've had my hands on strategies that can win. There's only one so far that I've seen since 2008 that has ever won in the global integrated war game. One strategy. And to give you an example of that strategy, it is very high in terms of its leveraging of unconventional warfare. But the very people that it needs to carry out that strategy and to be successful, the administration right now is in the process of cutting them. More than 5,000 special operations troops, for example, that would be needed to help do the laydown work so that we can be successful. So, in effect, all of the efforts that are going out right now in the United States, because of our policy contradictions, they're canceling each other. And we continue to stay static or even decline while our enemies are moving ahead of us. So we need a grand strategy. What I would propose to compete and to win is a grand strategy called prevention. And that strategy would involve putting the United States on a footing that prevents our adversaries and other ideological belief systems from overcoming us through sheer determination, through brute force, through whatever mechanism that they are working in. But we would essentially put ourselves on a competition footing where it's no longer sufficient and acceptable for our generals to compete. Anybody can compete. They have to win. And the last time we saw this attitude was post-attack on Pearl Harbor, when George Marshall fired nearly 300 generals. If you couldn't hack it in 90 days and begin to win for America, you were rotated to the back and you became an admin staff. you weren't ended at, as a career soldier or officer, but you were not in leadership, putting people's lives on the lines and making sure that success was occurring. We needed winners. George Marshall hired and fired until he got the winners. We have a lot of the same thing going on within the Department of Defense. The mediocrity is at a crescendo almost, right? Where we can't even fill our own ranks with a volunteer force, et cetera, et cetera. So that's first and foremost. Second to that, if you don't have borders, you don't have a nation, right? Let's just blend in with Canada, or let's just blend in with Mexico. Why do we need borders? So this is a problem that's solvable in 3 days. Really, this is absurd that this is happening. Some ascribe to different theories. They're conspiracy theories about the replacement theory and so forth, and that's all garbage. Here's the deal. The Democrats believe that overwhelmingly it's a humanitarian thing to do to let whoever wants to come here, come here. But at the same time, we the people of the United States know that that is not a practical solution. We cannot take all these people and house them and integrate them and have them be screened and have this be safe. Right now, there are 8 million question marks in the United States. Think that's safe? It's not. And we know it's not because of the data. We know who we've intercepted. We know that there's approximately 15,000 military-age Chinese males in the United States, and we have no idea why they're here. Okay, so what do we do about it? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to take by executive order and make the Homeland Defense mission. Homeland Defense falls under U.S. NORTHCOM. That is going to be a Title 32 mission of U.S. Northern Command, and we're going to give them 3 days to muster federal troops and seal the borders, north and south. That's all it will take, 3 days. Now, once we stop the bleeding, and we'll use reasonable technologies such as drones and patrols, but they will be given ROE where they can employ lethal force if necessary. Do you know how fast the word will spread? Overnight. The first that has to have the first person that presses the test on the ability to use lethal force to defend the borders of the United States, unfortunately, they may make an example of themselves. They may be wounded, or maybe even it may be even fatal. But it is worth the protection of your family, Tim, and mine. In 3 days, once we've stopped people and fentanyl from flowing over, by day 4, we're going to institute a 60-day registration period. In 60 days, every man, woman, and child who came across the border illegally will have an opportunity to get a registration number. Once that registration number is in their hand, they're going to be given a date. It's going to be within 45 days, and they're going to have to go through an interview, and this is where we begin to know who's here. So the first step was stop. This is no. That reality smacks against things like people may be trafficked, they may be in captive. There are situations that are mitigating, right? So we're going to give them the opportunity to turn that form in at a doctor's office, no postage, just a post office, turn it in through a victim's advocate, or even put it in the offering plate at church. The bottom line is, if you don't have that registration number and you're pulled over, you're leaving the country within 24 hours. How's that for an incentive? You better get that number, because that's your ticket in line, because we need to know who you are. Once we figure out who the 8 million people are that are here, that's the step I call decide. We're going to stop, we're going to know, and we're going to decide. We're going to make some smart decisions and some common sense decisions. We're a city set on a hill, and the American people try to do the right thing. We don't always get it right, but that's what sets us apart. And that's why people are coming here, because they know we will try to do the right thing. So if you're an Afghan translator who was abandoned by the Biden administration and left for dead after you'd given 10 to 15 years of service to the United States, and you had to come here to save your life, that's a mitigating circumstance. I think we can take that into consideration, and we can provide a place for you. This happened during the Vietnam era, right? We had to bring a lot of folks over here, and they integrated well into our society. Some of them are very successful businessmen, and they're contributing greatly to the United States. But if you are an MS-13 gang member and you have no business here in the United States, and you can't provide us a legitimate reason, you're going home. So we're going to do this sorting very quickly. And at the end of the day, we're going to understand whether folks need to be here because of education, whether they need to be here because they're a genuine refugee, or whether they're here to do us harm. And I think that we'll all rest better at night knowing that that is solved, not edited. We don't need to address immigration. We need to solve it. We need to enforce the laws on our books, and we need to give the states the ability to help our federal agencies actually enforce those laws. So that's the second. After having a national security enterprise that is second to none in the world, we're going to make sure that we restore the territorial integrity of the United States and who's coming in and out, because we know that the world is full of evil and that there are people that want to do us harm. And then finally, underpinning all of that is a great expense that right now you and I are seeing, which is the government is far and away beyond its own budget capabilities. We need to cut taxes across the board 33%, and that's what I plan to do. There's a reason for that. Right now, the American people are hurting. Heck, I feel it every day myself. My electric bill has gone up 33% in the last year. Yeah. The cost of household goods and groceries is enormous and off the rails, and yet the Biden administration claims that the economy is winning. It costs more for a home right now than it has ever cost in American history. Let that sink in. More than ever. And what's happening is that the wealthier are getting wealthier because they're buying up all the homes and then they become landlords. Okay, hasn't this happened before? They say history rhymes. So the American government is supposed to get out of the way and to get the American people onto a footing that allows them to be successful. So we're being choked with taxes, we're being choked with regulations, and I intend to scale both of those back immediately. When Reagan did a 28% tax cut in the 1980s, it reduced not only the tax rate, but it doubled the income of the federal government from taxes. How does that work? Because the GDP went up. When you can keep more of what you earn, when you can save more, when you can bring the assets that you have out from under a tax shelter, you now involve it in the economy and you begin to grow and participate in economic activity rather than acting like a tortoise in a shell. And that's what we need to happen again. Our GDP is being overcome by China, and our GDP, truthfully, is the measure of our national strength. Without a strong GDP, we cannot build those ships we need. Without a strong GDP, we cannot provide for the defense of our country. We can't do all of the things that we need to do with our critical infrastructure and to backfit all of the things that have been allowed to decay over the last 20 or 30 years since the Cold War. A strong GDP is the center, the core of American power. And our adversaries know that, and that's why they're trying to bleed us under a death by 1,000 cuts, by stealing our technology, by creating trade deficits with the United States so that everything we're exporting weakens us, whether it's raw materials or whatever it is. So at the end of the day, those are the three planks: to restore our national security to number one, so that it's a fool's errand to attempt to compete with the United States. Number two, we're going to secure our borders within 72 hours of taking office, and then within within 60 days, we're going to know who's here and start making decisions about who stays. And then finally, we're going to cut taxes and regulations. We're going to cut taxes by 33% and regulations. We're going to cut that tape from around the companies and people who are trying to grow and support this nation. So those are the principal things. There are a lot of other issues that are on the periphery that people believe are important, but I believe if we do those three, we can recenter the nation. Then we can start talking about how do we get more doctors? How do we overhaul healthcare? How do we make sure that Social Security is solvent? All very important. Balancing the budget. All can be done, but not if you have a bunch of politicos that you send back to Washington, D.C., and they do the same thing over and over and over, and we sit here hoping to get a different result. That's the very definition of insanity.
Well, David, thank you so much. Absolutely remarkable overview. I want to change a little bit to a topic that is close to my heart, and that is the economy. It's been said that the business of America is business, but our industrial might has been seriously eroded. Steel and automobiles went to Japan. Technology went to China, as you've mentioned. Food production has gone to Mexico, some to Canada. Programming has gone to East India, and customer service has been outsourced to the Philippines. Corporate profits keep growing, but offshoring has essentially pulled the rug out from under the American workforce. What is your plan to create new jobs and bring home the ones that we have sent overseas?
Thank you. Look, I want to tell a quick story. When I was 9 years old, I locked myself out of my toy box. And so imagine going for months and months with no toys. I had to get pretty creative. But eventually I got tired of the situation and I took my toy box back to Walmart where I built it. And if you remember in those days, it was the, late 1980s. You could walk into a Walmart store and on the roof, hanging from the rafters, would be a banner and it would say, this many jobs created, U.S. jobs by this Walmart store. That was Cleveland, Oklahoma Walmart in around 1989. And I walked into the service desk with my toy box, put it up on the counter, and no one knew how to unlock it. And up strolls an old man who I would later find out was Sam Walton. And he pulled off a big key ring and he unlocked that box for me. And there was a man who was a captain of American industry because he knew that his industry could be successful if America was successful. And we need to get back to that mentality, Tim. We need to have accountability in corporate America that says, if you're sending jobs offshore, you need to help us understand what's going on with that. Are you in a critical industry? Are you outsourcing, for example, microchips, to another country, or are you bringing jobs here? Are you outsourcing your steel production, or are you bringing jobs back to the United States? Over the course of the transition throughout the Walton Company, this is well known, the family took over, the corporate advisors took over, God bless them, and they made it a very successful company, right? But in the process of that, it decimated small town America. Of just, driving up and down, hit 32 counties across Iowa, and many of those towns, the small towns, and I saw this happening myself growing up, having entered the workforce at 11 years old. But the small towns, there was shrinkage. The main streets were becoming ghost towns because all of the little small businesses that created those towns were drying up as the jobs were being sent overseas. So I understand that in a free market, you want to make sure that your nation has what we call a competitive advantage, right? So if Philippines, for example, is great at doing the things that they're great at, which is customer service, then under the theory of free economics, you would offshore that to them where they have a competitive advantage, where maybe you can buy that less expensively and then let your workforce concentrate on something else. But I think the question here is, one, a bit rhetorical, but what is America good at now? What is our competitive advantage? We used to be good at steel and automobiles and things like that, right? And now it seems as though we're offshoring everything. To your point earlier on food, right? Can you imagine that we send all of our food to Mexico and then we get in a tussle and then one day Mexico says, well, you know what? How about no food? Is that out of the realm of the possible? I'll tell you this, Germany and Russia were engaged in very meaningful trade, and they had signed a non-aggression pact, at a point. And as the trade cars from Russia were on their way to Germany, Germany was sending troop trains to aggress Russia for living space. A nation that cannot look well to its own going is a nation that is going to be at the mercy of its enemies. A nation that refuses to acknowledge it is engaged in a conflict when it is a nation that will lose that conflict. And so you and I, as the American people, are at a decision point. We can choose to ignore these things, but that will come at the expense of the future. And that will come at the expense of our children and our grandchildren and future generations. And I am firmly in the camp that we're better than that. That Americans can take the short view and be successful and take the long view. And we're in a very, very negative place as a society. We're cynical. I think the recent reports I've seen relating to a block of Trump supporters. Almost, I think around 10 to 12% of them believe that we should just toss out the Constitution and try something else. Okay. Around 83% of Americans right now believe that we're at risk of a civil war or some sort of civil unrest. Ray Dalio, the founder of one of the largest hedge funds in America, has recently said we are in stage 5 out of 6 toward a civil war. Well, what does that mean exactly? Well, I think today, Tim, that the United States is in a constitutional crisis and a war at the same time. So I think we've talked a little bit about the nature of the war, and I think that, it was once said by Clausewitz, you have to understand the nature of the war in which you're engaged. Don't take it for something it isn't, or wish it to be something by its nature it's impossible to be. Right now, we're in a quiet shadow war with China, and it's escalating. And to be quite honest with you, it's a very interesting dynamic with this nation. It's the oldest surviving civilization on Earth that has been continuous, and they marshal 1/4 of humanity. If you look at their recruiting videos, for example, they understand that conflict is ahead. And in 2019, their recruiting video for the People's Liberation Army said, "Peace behind us, war to the front." And so their strategy with the United States, and you've heard me say it before, is called the guest becomes the owner. It's an insidious, patient strategy, and they're a very patient culture. I think it's one of their greatest virtues. And so I'm not here to extol China because they're our enemy, okay? And they have made, in no uncertain terms, a bid to overcome the United States because our culture, our freedom is at odds with the communist ideology, which Xi Jinping is far surpassed Mao, Stalin, and Lenin in his aggressive embrace of the communist ideology, which is that this collectivism idea and all people having all things in common is the penultimate of the human existence, and that the state is God, and the state, as Ronald Reagan said, was governed by a few intellectual elites in a distant capital who know how to run our lives better than we do. In the United States, we reject that idea wholeheartedly. And what we're seeing, though, happen is this kind of crop up of Marxism through our institutions. We're seeing it come up through everything from think tanks to Harvard University. And it says socialism first, then it moves its way into Marxism. And guess what? Here's a news flash. In the Cultural Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, I was at a town hall in New Hampshire the other day, and a late-aged woman, she probably in her late 80s, seasoned citizen, she said, she interrupted me in the middle of speaking with her thick accent, and she said, this is the same, it's what I saw when I was in Poland. It is Bolshevism, she said. It's exactly the same, what I'm seeing today in the United States. Oh, it's an eyewitness account, Tim. She's right. It's the same thing repackaged. And it's taking advantage of our openness as a society, and we can fight it, we can overcome it. But we have to understand what we're dealing with. So from that standpoint, I think we're on good footing. I think many in America are beginning to wake up. But what we don't have time for is our JV candidates or our deniers to come into office and say, okay, I'm going to take a couple years to get my footing, because we're in a late stage of this. And during the Han Dynasty, in the late Han Dynasty, around 1066, it wasn't around then, it was in 1066, Roman envoys actually finally made it into the court of the leader of China, the emperor, if you will. And they brought things like tortoise shells and ivory and other things, and China recorded that these things were of very little value. And China's name for Rome at that time was Second China. And China was emptying Rome of its treasure. There were literally equivalents of trillions and trillions of dollars going towards the Silk Road, because essentially silk was the fashion of the time, right? Lightweight material, breathable, And everyone in Rome, it was a status symbol. And there was concern that Rome was being emptied. And that was called the Silk Road, right? And it was being emptied. Rome was bankrupt. Two things bankrupt Rome. One, China, and two, a plague. And between those two, internal strife and Germanic incursions to the north, the whole fabric of the empire ripped away under its own weight. So the Belt and Road Initiative was established 15 years ago to begin to achieve the same thing with the United States. It was called the New Belt and Road Initiative, and it's been working. And so now in approximately 140 countries, China has begun to put its tentacles in and to vacate money and pull that back as the center of power, because they're very good at economics and they understand that this is a long game. So from that standpoint, time is not on our side. We have to rebuild American corporate industry. And we have a candidate, for example, Ron DeSantis, I'll name his name. He is the, obviously the current sitting governor in Florida. And I live in Florida, lived here for almost 3 years. And to be quite frank, the state is thriving, but it has very little to do with him. He makes poor choices, right? He's picked wars with the state's largest employer. He goes on personal attacks. There's a lot of problems I have with the way he governs and takes the credit. But notwithstanding, he's made some statements like, look, we need to go back to a 600-ship Navy. It's time for the United States to project power. Great, Ron. But do you know that we don't even have the machines to make the tools? Do you know that we have such an inadequate shipbuilding capability right now that we would be pressed to probably even build 10 to 15 ships a year right now in the United States that were large? And it's just this deep level of knowledge inadequacy, a paucity of knowledge about the state of our nation and how we fit into the greater scheme in terms of world affairs. And it's a lack of understanding that power is the language of international politics on the left that is leading to our decline. And if you can see that playing out at the State Department, for example, we're seeing that in most cases our response to things around the world as they heat up and people test the United States, and as we make mistakes like the withdrawal of Afghanistan, that everyone is testing us, and our response is generally to shake our head and send a strongly worded letter. America can do better than that.
Well, I want to touch on equity versus equality. Should the government focus on creating a level playing field for everyone, or be involved with allocating resources and opportunities to help everyone reach an equal outcome? Now, this question typically is about race and culture, but I'm wondering if equity should also include a discussion of the growing wealth inequality and the 1%.
Good question. And look, I'm going to share a personal story about my upbringing. My family was well-to-do at one time as I was growing up, and then they hit rock bottom. And I was homeless at a point. I lived in a horse trailer. My family was evicted from low-income, what we would call Section 8 housing and urban development, HUD housing. And then guess what? When you hit rock bottom, did you know you can keep falling? Because that's what happened to my family. And I ended up in a single parent home with my mom raising us, but I had a different horizon than the others who I ended up with in terms of being next to them economically, right? The low income houses where I was in these projects, these trailer parks, if you were, for low income people that I lived with in Oklahoma and in rural areas. They had never been out of that poverty. But my family understood that, the pursuit of happiness or the pursuit of opportunity could provide you a way out. And I knew that as a young person. So at 8 years old, I left the private school I was in because I could no longer afford it. And at 11 years old, I entered the workforce full time. I was a child laborer. And I would do that until 19, 20 years old, when I would, with no schooling, go to the Air Force recruiter, and they would say, okay, we'd love to have you, but we can't use you. You have no education. So I'd go back, get tutoring, get a GED, and then pursue excellence in the Air Force, and a lot of opportunity would unfold. But along the way, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've owned businesses all my life. I've been successful at these things. And America is not a guarantee. America is an experiment. Life is not a guarantee. There is no society that you can go into and have guarantees. But if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to put forward the effort, you should be able to reap the fruit of that labor. And right now, the American dream right now, it is estimated to cost $3.4 million for your house, your cars, and to raise your 2 kids. Okay, if that's the American dream. Going off of that construct, the average earnings for a male in the United States are around $1.4 million over a lifetime. And I'm just reflecting some broad generalities. I don't think that's a white-collar wage. I think that's a blue-collar wage. But there is some inequity there. But we also live in a land where the government should get out of our way. We should never be in fear of our government. If we're told to be suspicious of the Constitution, that's our enemies at work on us. If we're told to be suspicious of one another, that's our enemy at work at us. If we're told to be suspicious of the IRS, well, that's just common sense. But if we're told to be suspicious about whether or not our government system is a good system, that's our enemy at work on us. All of this Marxism that's coming up through the ranks is working to undermine public trust. And by the way, our very imperfect government, run by very imperfect people, hasn't helped itself. But we have to figure out where to trust and where not to trust. The Constitution, our government, is fundamentally sound. I've worked within a very imperfect government for plenty of years, and I've even had the system come after me, right? For doing the right things, right? For taking the right stands, for standing for truth. But that's okay. And at the end of the day, it is us who make the more perfect union, we the people. And we have to elect people that have character to go and fight for us and on our behalf rather than advancing their own interests. And right now, the problem, the pattern that America has gotten into is that we continue to elect people who fight for the same talking points, and we're going around and around and around the tree. And we never get anywhere in terms of advancing the agenda. We do need to get regulation out of people's way so that they are not held back. If they will work hard and come out of mom's basement and make a career for themselves, they need to be able to go as far as they want to. If people want to educate themselves and become a leader in their field and pursue Nobel Prize winning technology, we need to open the door for them. But at no time should we ever say, you know what, Tim, you've only worked 10% as hard as Dave, but we're going to give you the same thing. And it's the old, analogy of the, professor taking all of the A-level students in his class and splitting the grade out to the whole class and saying, now everybody gets a B minus, and we're going to, have even grades for all. That kind of equity, if you will, is immoral. And it is a socialism light that is working its way up through our society that is saying we can all have the same thing, we can all do the same thing. If you were to distribute, this is a good analogy, all the wealth in the United States during the first week of January 2024, and then you were to come back by, let's say, the end of Q2 in 2024, 6 months in, the distributed wealth of the United States would be, again, probably concentrated in probably 10%, because certain people have certain abilities. And it's not the place of government to guarantee that everyone can succeed to the same level, because certain people have different talents. I think the government, a just government, makes it so that certain people in our society do not fall through the cracks. That those who really need help have a social system to fall back on. Guess what? My family used food stamps at times growing up. We needed it. I remember we were always ashamed of it, but we ate and we never were starved, right? And then we got off of that system as soon as we could because we wanted to be self-sufficient. We should never create a society that makes it feel okay and that condones a handout system. But a system that is a hand up is something very different. That's humane.
Yeah.
That's just, that's right, that's true. And it's what we would do with our family. Uncle Bob is, having some trouble right now. He got laid off. He's having trouble making his mortgage. Let's all pitch in and help Uncle Bob for the next few months until, well, wait a minute. Uncle Bob doesn't want to go back to work. He decided he likes playing, Xbox all day. Well, how much longer are we going to help Uncle Bob? So, Tim, common sense is becoming less common in a nation where you have Marxism at work. And I want to tell you what it actually looks like. This is real, okay? I wasn't long ago meeting with somebody who I thought was going to be a prospective investor in my company, and they were in Malibu. I flew to California, had some other meetings, and I went and I took a meeting with this person in Malibu. And before the meeting, I guess he decided he liked me, and I had some other business people there, but he showed me kind of what I would call the back of the house. And, adjacent to his home, he had another building, and in that building were young students, 19 to 25 years old, doing this all day. They were socialists and communists, and they were spreading propaganda within the United States about essentially Marxist ideology. Okay, it's a real thing. It's happening. And guess what? People are funding it. And if you think this is a new idea, it's not. Because if you go back to the writings of Lenin and Marx and others, they talked about how to essentially destroy a culture from the inside out so that communism could subsume that culture. And so I think, for us as the people of the United States, we've come, Ronald Reagan said back in 1963, we're at a time of choosing, right? He was talking about whether or not we surrender to communism back during the Cold War or whether we fight it till we defeat it. And he came to power and he made good on his promise. And the question is, for the American people, where are those today who are willing to step off of the line of everyday life, who are willing to go serve as one of us for all of us? Because our nation was never meant to have a political class. We were never meant to have oligarchs and groomed candidates handed down, and then the establishment said, here, and as you hold your nose, vote for one of these. It was never supposed to be like that. But that's what we've grown accustomed to. And I'm bucking that trend because I think we can do better. And as far as I understand, notwithstanding our imperfect nation and our imperfect government, we, the people, still have the power to choose the next president of the United States. And I feel that choice in 2024 will be probably one of the most important presidencies since George Washington, who I respect a great deal because after being offered more power, he walked away from it and in meekness went back to civilian life. We need leaders like that who understand it's not about an elite. The president of the United States is the chief servant of the people. He needs to represent our interests and understand what it's like to be us, not just separated in a wonderful building that we call the White House and completely disconnected from it all.
Well, David, on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today and wish you the absolute best in your continuing 2024 campaign. Again, I want to thank you so much for your career of tremendous service to our country, both over the last few decades as well as in the future. So let me close by asking, what is coming up on the 2024 campaign? Where do you see yourself going? I know that you have been traveling. You've been on the road. You mentioned getting a speeding ticket to one of those rallies. You're going to be doing more travel and more speaking in the future. Where do you see that going over the next few months?
Well, thanks for asking. And, I'll make a couple predictions. As you know, Tim, I'm a scientist. I'm a national security strategist. I'm a military veteran. I'm a business person, and I'm also, a father and a husband. One of the first things I'm going to do is pay that speeding ticket. The point is, I'm like us, right? And I'm offering to take a turn for the American people, to represent our nation's immediate concerns and form a turnaround team, not that talks about the issues, but that actually performs in such a way that we turn it around like a company that's literally collapsing. Because I believe without the right leadership, our nation will not recover. Okay, I believe we will be in that incipient decline from that point on. And I think we have a couple of years to turn it around. I really do. So I think first and foremost, the 2024 election is probably going to be something shocking and surprising to all of us. I think that we're going to have a lot of unknowns, a lot of firsts, a lot of precedents. Certainly the Colorado ballot fight in the Constitution there is a first. Never under the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment has someone been removed from a state ballot. I think these fights are going to continue. I think ultimately I'm predicting that Trump will not be the Republican nominee. And I'm there to make sure that that does not happen. I consider him to be the antithesis of what our nation needs. We need someone who can handle the extraordinary challenges that we are facing externally, while simultaneously unifying our nation and bringing us back together to fight united against the challenges that we face. And I think the American people want permission to come together and not to battle with each other. I want to agree with you on the 90% of things we agree on, not disagree on the 10% and battle each other on the 10%. And I think that, in the I should say around 1815 to 1825 was an era in the United States called the era of good feelings. We have had such a challenging last 10 years, and even before that. I think we can usher in a period in American history where we begin to do the things that make sense for us, where we can begin to address the challenges both on the right and the left, if we will commit to work together, if we will commit to unifying, if we'll commit to the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is one of the greatest experiments that humanity has ever undertaken. I think that we can enter into that period where we strengthen our national security, where we get a handle and solve immigration issues, and make sure that we have an economy that works for the American people, where all people can pursue their dreams and happiness, and that we have a safety net in our society where if folks are going to be on Social Security, that system is solvent, where if they don't have a place for food, they can get food, and that where we balance our natural resources, restore our internal capacity to build, to grow agriculture, and to foster our national security infrastructure, our critical infrastructure, and our defense industrial base and manufacturing. All of this can be reinvigorated. But it's about setting that vision. And I think right now that vision is woefully absent, but it doesn't have to be. It's you and I that set that vision. And who will we choose to lead us forward in that vision? And how will they put that team together? And like, some say, younger people express, I'm 42, I'm not that young anymore, but I'm on the young side for a presidential candidate, trust me. And I have the experience to deliver these things for the United States because that's my record. I've taken over billions of dollars in programs that were 5 to 8 years behind for the Department of Defense, and I've corrected them and made them inspectable within 1 year. Why? Because I brought together the best team to get the job done, the mission done. And right now it's got to be mission America, not mission right, not mission left, not mission middle, not mission Green Party, but mission us. And I think that we can do that. I don't think it's too late. And I think that right now our nation is hungry for that. So I'm going to go back out and hit the campaign trail. I'm looking for, modest resources. I'll be in New Hampshire competing. But if you want to learn more about the campaign, go to David Stuckenberg, Stuckenberg.com. Learn about the issues that I think that we can address within the first 24 months of the presidency. And guess what? Here's a pledge. If we can't start to turn things around within the first 24 months of the presidency, how about that candidate doesn't even think about trying to go for a re-election? How about that for a commitment? because I think the American people have to have their trust restored in government. And this is how we fight an enemy that is trying to undermine our trust for one another and for our system, our institution, and these sacred documents that are our nation. So by fundamentally restoring the trust of the American people, by delivering, we will reduce paranoia, we'll increase our happiness, and that's what this is all about. It's life, liberty, and our happiness. So those are the things I want to do for the American people. This is going to be Mr. Toad's wild ride, so hang on. Don't lose faith in the process. I think it's going to get rocky. I think that we cannot allow Trump to be elected as a candidate. That's why I'm running. Certainly you might expect me to say that, but I think that he is incapable of delivering the ability for our nation not only to unify and come back together as a united nation, but we have to be on our feet over the next 2 to 5 years as we face the challenges that we have externally. And so we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And my greatest concern, and I think that of a lot of the electorate, is that he will offer a division and a turmoil that will really take us away from the focus that we need as a nation. And so let's do better than this. Let's elect one of us for all of us. Let's stop doing the politician thing. I'm a non-politician. I'm a soldier. I'm a servant of the people. I want to continue to serve you, and I want to deliver results that will usher in a period of American growth and strength where we can hold our head high again. And I think that's what's ahead for us in 2024.
David, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Tim, thanks so much for the interview. I appreciate your time, brother, and we'll talk again soon.